Hi, everyone, and welcome to Purple Coach Conversations with Tanya and myself. Our goal is to normalize, educate, and inspire conversations around diversity and inclusion. We're both coaches, mothers, and entrepreneurs. And while we're not diversity experts, our aim is to have conversations with people that have something interesting and unique to say about their journeys and about their experiences around diversity and inclusion.
So I'm introducing you to a very special guest, Ellie. Thanks for joining us today. Ellie has an impressive resume. She was the head of department of one of the top-ranking meteorology departments in the world. She's also a accredited coach and mentor and facilitator. She has founded Equasense, which is a diversity and inclusion consultancy firm in order to guide, train a varied group of institutions who want to be more inclusive. And I wanted to start the interview taking a quote from her website, Equasense. And she says, if you want quick, easy off-the-shelf solutions so that you can say you have done diversity and inclusion, then I'm not the person for you. So I wanted to start with this sentence as a way to introduce Ellie, and we want to hear more from you, Ellie, and we want to hear your story.
Thanks very much for having me. That is a really interesting sentence. It took me a while to come up with that one for the website. But I think it says, if you want to be more inclusive as an organisation, you have to accept that this is going to take a little while. It's going to mean some hard work, both on the behalf of individuals and organisations, and will fundamentally change by the end of it. So there's no quick wins. So that's where it comes from. And I think that comes from my experience working with different organisations. Every organisation is different, therefore the solution is different.
Yes, love that. It's not a simple tick the box. You have to want to do the work. So tell us about you, Ellie. Tell us a bit your story.
So yeah, I am a diversity and inclusion consultant, and I work with businesses to make sure they're a place where they and all their people can thrive. I'm also, as you mentioned, a coach, and I mainly work with academics and teachers and scientists around career development and life balance. And both of those things stem from my underlying value of wanting to do things that are important for society. So before I was a diversity and inclusion consultant, I was a climate scientist in universities for 26 years. So I did research about climate change, which is a very important societal issue. So I felt like I was helping the world, the grand scheme of things, doing that. But after a while, I realised that I was getting asked to do more and more work for women in science. I trained as a physics student, so there weren't very many women doing the job that I did. And there still aren't that many women doing physics and engineering as careers. And so I was being asked to do more and more of that. And I really enjoyed it. So I started working more on women in science and thinking about gender stereotypes. And then I have my kids. And my kids are now 11 and 13. But when they started primary school, I was seeing their friends being labelled because of the colour of their skin or their socioeconomic background. And whilst I wouldn't say that any of the teachers or other parents were being racist or discriminatory, I would say that there were stereotypes that were alive and well. And I just felt that that was not right. So that also helped me move into working in diversity and inclusion more generally. And 18 months ago, I took a plunge and left my university career and started working with lots of different people, which is great.
So always for very special causes. So you started in meteorology, climate change, which is also in the forefront. I watched the Bill Gates documentary yesterday, actually, on how he's innovating in that front as well. So it is something that it's everyone's conversation. And so mostly as a teacher, and then you moved on to diversity, gender diversity interest, and now race interest. So those two, would you say those two are your main areas of interest in terms of diversity and inclusion?
So when I was in my employed role, so my last 4 years at the university I worked at, I was Dean for Diversity and Inclusion with responsibility across all areas for staff and students. But it was gender and race that I had my particular responsibility for. I actually held that role as job chair, which was the first time a senior leadership team role had been held as a job chair. So my job chair did most of the work on LGBT issues and on disability. So we kind of shared it between us. So that's where my experience is. What I do now is usually work more generally with organisations who are at the start of their diversity and inclusion journey. So it's a bit of a broad thing. And we might identify that for their organisation, race or gender or disability is a particular theme that they need to go forward. But I do the bit that's kind of, what is inclusion mean to you, and those kinds of things. So I'm a bit of a generalist mostly, but I started off as a woman in STEM.
Really interesting as well, just how how your journey has evolved, and quite differently as well, from climate change into diversity and inclusion. But as you're saying, making that connection of wanting to make a change and wanting to have some sort of impact in your life, and that's just amazing that you're thinking about not just yourself, but the wider good that you can do for other people. As an expert in diversity and inclusion, just talking about impact and the kind of impact we make on this planet, what was it like for you, thinking about in your role before George Floyd's death and before it became talking about inclusion and diversity and race and racism and so on? What was it like for you as a consultant in organizations?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. There was definitely a change around George Floyd's death. So I had a role as an employee running diversity and inclusion for a while, and then I was working as a consultant for about 8 months before George Floyd's death. And in both cases, the focus tended to be on diversity and inclusion in general. I used to say that anyone would talk to me about gender equality in the organisations I worked with. Quite a lot of people would talk to me about LGBTQ issues. A few people would talk about race equality, and absolutely no one would talk about religion. Not at all. So I spent 4 years trying to get my organisation to talk about religion and supporting students in particular of different religious beliefs and none. So I think many places were much further forward in thinking and actions on gender equality than on anything else. So what you then saw around the time of George Floyd's death was definitely a pickup in the interest around racism. And since then, what I've seen is more requests for work around anti-racism training, around listening to people with lived experience of racism within organisations, and a bit more of a nuanced approach as well. So thinking, instead of referring to employees as Black and minority ethnicities or BAME groups, people talking about Black or Asian groups. So there's definitely been a bit of a change, and I'm seeing also a lot of requests for microaggression training, which I think has come out of people's awareness and understanding of everyday racism.
Really interesting. It's interesting when you talk about what people were willing to talk about and not talk about, and what they were absolutely not willing to talk about was religion. I wouldn't have foreseen that, but at the same time, it can be such a triggering subject to discuss as well. So perhaps not very surprising.
And what do your clients look like, Ellie? Who comes and approaches you to talk about these topics?
That's a really wide group of clients and organisations. So my background is in higher education and universities, so I obviously have clients there, and particularly there are schemes and charter marks within higher education. So there's one called Athena Swan, which is about gender equality, and then there's a race equality action plan, and they are run by kind of umbrella body that oversees higher education. So there is an incentive for universities to look at gender and to look at race.
Sorry to interrupt. What did you say? Higher education? I'm not familiar with that.
Higher education.
Higher. Sorry. I heard something.
Higher.
Got it.
Higher university, higher education. So they have an incentive to look at these things. So I do quite a bit of work with them. But more recently, since George Floyd's death, I've been approached by a number of different small and rapidly growing businesses who also have other ethical strands to them. So they might make part of their brand might be that they are sustainable, their carbon footprint is low, those kinds of things. And they see social justice and anti-racism and gender equality as another step that is about being an ethical brand.
Okay.
It often tends to be people who know they want to do something, but they're not quite sure what they want to do, and maybe don't have the in-house expertise. So I tend to work with smaller organisations. But you only have to look at LinkedIn actually to see there's been a huge surge in roles for diversity and inclusion professionals at all levels, from managing events to strategic direction across all sorts of organisations. So there is a massive surge across a wide range of sizes, sectors, and all sorts of things at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and I'm curious because Anne and I we've been interviewing quite a few people, and we've been also reading about diversity and inclusion, the experts. And correct me if I'm wrong, but what I find sometimes a little bit frustrating is that, it feels like the experts in diversity and inclusion will look diverse, in some way. And what was interesting from you was that actually you are a white person specializing in diversity and inclusion, and I would like to hear your thought of that, of the representation already that's less widespread, and how the fact that you're a white person, will affect the people approaching you. Will it make it easier or less easy, and so I want to have your take on that.
Yeah, I think, as you will have seen from your reading and talking to people, I think it is fair to say that across the diversity and inclusion community, there are differences of opinion on the role, particularly around race, but on the role of white allies. Similar discussions happen about men getting involved with gender equality work, but not quite to the same extent at the moment. Generally more accepted that be a feminist and still be a man. It's something that I have been reflecting on a lot over the past year, and I think it's really important that all diversity and inclusion professionals do. I've certainly been walked into groups and conferences about racism where I have been one of only 2 or 3 white people in the room, which is a useful experience actually, because many of the other environments I'm in, it would be opposite. And I think it's healthy to feel othered at some points in your personal experiences. So I think what I would say is all my reflections have led me to where I think it's important that as many voices are talking about racism in particular, and equality and inequality in general, and calling for action as possible. And that's as many different voices in as many different places. That includes white allies. I remember when I was working on a gender equality project for science, and I was trying to get an organisation on board, trying to get a department and the people in there to kind of embrace it. And I couldn't get through to them. And in the end, I invited someone from another organisation that had some success in this area. He happened to be a man, and he came in and he talked about why it was important and what he'd done. And there was a group of people in the department who suddenly went from being, I have no interest in this, to, I get it now, it's really important. And I remember how infuriating that was, that I had been saying the same thing as a woman, and this gentleman who, he's a great person, but he'd come in and said the same thing, and yet he'd got the traction. So there are some parallels there, which sometimes, unfortunately, it still takes a white person talking about racism to make a particular audience take note. Now, that, of course, is itself an indicator of structural racism, and it shouldn't be that way. But there are still some...
Sorry, I would like you to repeat that sentence, because it's such an important sentence, what you just said. Sorry, it's amazing. Sometimes it takes...
Sometimes, unfortunately, it still takes a white person talking about racism to make a particular audience take notice. It shouldn't be that way. And that is, of course, a demonstration of structural racism in itself. But there are still places that I can go and be heard where other voices won't be heard just yet. So I've started trying to work with some diversity inclusion professionals who have lived experience of racism. And what we try and do is assess, if an organisation asks one of us to go and do some work with them, we'll try and assess whose voice is likely to be heard best at that moment in time. So it might be that I will go and say, we'll do some general, you need to understand what inclusion is about or start talking about racism. Or it might be that they get that and they don't need me, and what they really need is people with lived experience to work on allyship or listening exercises and programs. And so I'm trying to work with people to deliver that in that way. And I think I can be comfortable doing that. Hopefully, at some point, there won't be spaces where I can go that other people can't to talk about racism. And ultimately, I'd like to do myself out of that line of work. That's my aim.
I think it's so powerful what you say there as well. And I agree with Tanya. The fact that there's certain places till today that certain voices will not be heard when talking about racism. It's really sad, first of all. Yeah. And it's, I'd like to say it's shocking, but I don't think it is shocking. The other thing as well that you mentioned as well, which was quite interesting, that you were the only, I think you said it was you and one other person who was white in that crowd. And it's something we've spoken about with Tanya, with a previous colleague as well, or friend. And we talked about how it is for Black people when you're the only Black person in the group, and it happens, it's happened to me several times. I'm the only Black person in the restaurant or wherever, and that feeling like standing out, even if you don't want to feel like that, but you do, there is an experience for sure that when you're the only one of your kind, so to say, there is. Tell me about that. How did that feel for you? I think a lot of Black people experience that quite a lot, especially when you live in Europe. But it's not something I think a lot of white people get to experience.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I'd experienced something similar when I was, on many occasions, when I was the only woman in a room full of men in my previous careers. So I was the only person at a meeting of science, for example. So I had experienced that kind of not really thinking that I belong, or, how do I work out the rules here? How do I get what I want to be heard? I don't quite know who my allies are. And that's a really interesting statement, because just because in that situation, another woman isn't necessarily an ally to what I want to say, okay? But so I had that experience before. I think with the race side of things, I think my awareness of how far behind society is in accepting the need for race equality and accepting the structural racism made it even more heightened, because my awareness of, this is what some Black people will experience all day, every day, was much more heightened than it was in the previous example. So that feeling of, I'm a bit uncomfortable. I don't know what the rules are. I don't know whether these people are going to welcome me here. I don't know that I have anything. It's interesting. I don't know that I have anything to say here. Now that's an interesting thought. How could I possibly contribute anything in an area where I don't have any lived experience from that point of view? So it kind of triggers all sorts of imposter syndrome type stuff as well. That really kicks in. If you don't feel that you fit in, then all those uncertainties about your own worth and value will kick in. So I think it's an experience we should give more white people, if possible, actually.
I guess that in coaching, we face that as well. As a white person, we might not be, we might not be 100% aware of what the other person is going through. And what is sure 100% is that we don't know what racism is, really knowing it, because we've never experienced it, right? But and I wonder if the awareness is enough. And Anne, I'd love to hear your thought on that. And look, I remember last week, and we spoke about that we might have a guest who is quite a senior executive, and he was coached by white coaches, very senior white coaches, and he didn't feel understood in many areas himself, because they were. But there's a difference here. There was no real awareness of the fact that they had all these blind spots, etc. Around him, and saying that he was uncoachable, etc. When actually he wasn't able to share some very important aspects about the way people were treating him. So I'd love to hear also what you think, Anne, as a Black person, like what's your take on that situation, on Ellie's imposter syndrome?
I think it's very interesting what you say there, Ellie, and thank you as well, by the way, for the honesty and the openness with sharing that as well, because it's a brave and insightful thing to share, I think, with everyone who's listening. I think on that point, in terms of what you've just said, Ellie, having that awareness, I think, means so much. Having that awareness that, first of all, a lot of Black people experience this every day, and just appreciating, that, and appreciating their experience from in that perspective. Also, the awareness of everything that comes up for you. You talked about, I don't know if I'll be accepted, I don't know if I fit in. Again, those are things that, creep up for a lot of Black people when you're in certain settings and you're the only Black person, and you feel like, okay, I don't know if they're looking at me, I don't know if I feel like I belong, and all of that kind of thing. Insecurities, you talked about imposter syndrome, especially when you're talking about, things like racism and race, and you haven't experienced it yourself. But I think the biggest thing is just acknowledging that, and acknowledging that the experience that Black people have in such situations is something that you'll never fully, truly understand. But having a bit of empathy for the whole situation. But it's I think it's just that awareness and empathy can go far.
I think that empathy is really important, and not that I can ever understand racism as such, but to have a tiny piece of insight into those feelings with the awareness around it is, I think, something that many people would benefit from. And it's great to, not great, that's the wrong word, it's very useful to hear lived experiences from people. And I have learned so much from that. But that tiny, tiny fragment of insight from being in that environment really links into, then allows me to hear better. I mean, we're all coaches, so it's about hearing and not just listening, but it allows me to hear better as well. And I think it's important that I am white, and I acknowledge that I have privilege through being white. I have other privileges too, but I have benefited from the structural racist society that we have, and therefore, in my view, it's my job to dismantle that. And so that's why I will keep doing work around race, but always bearing in mind what the best place for me is to do that. And that will mean saying no to things. So I have said no to things because I don't think I'm the right person, and it should be done by somebody who has experienced race directly. And I will say no to work for that reason.
That's a very, very honorable thing, I think, to do as well, when you talk about, as coaches and working in an ethical manner. When you think that you're not the right person for the job, just being able to acknowledge that and have that kind of insight and perspective, I think is really important. Previous to George Floyd's death, a lot of organizations, and from my experience anyway, you might correct me if I'm wrong, Ellie, were not really proactively dealing with issues around diversity, around equality, and especially around racism and so on. But since his death, there's been such a huge increase in organizations, training their staff and their employees and so on around diversity, around equality, race, what is okay and not okay to say, and so on. I'm just wondering, from your perspective, how many, I'm trying to phrase the question properly. How many of these organizations do you feel are actively doing this and actively making these changes because they genuinely think it's important, as opposed to a tick box exercise because it's the new thing to do and people are talking about it and I need to be seen as socially responsible as a company as well?
Oh, now there's a question. I think the jury is still out on which organisations will make meaningful changes. The reason I say that is that I think what everyone needs to understand is that we're talking about a massive culture change here. We're talking about a current culture that has been embedded for centuries, particularly in the UK and the US, but elsewhere too. There are no quick fixes, and there's a need for systematic evaluation of every aspect of an organisation, as well as massive education pieces around causes and impact of systemic racism, and some still courses and training about how not to be racist. Essentially, is what we're talking about. We might call it other things, but that's mainly what it is. So we've seen a lot of people initiate reviews of race equity. We've seen a lot of people and organisations make statements about wanting to listen to the lived experience of their employees, different backgrounds. We saw a lot of people blacking out their social media feeds. So, I think my view is we have to wait and see a bit which organisations will continue and make meaningful change. Hiring a diverse cohort without supporting them and dismantling barriers elsewhere in the organisation isn't enough. Pledging support on your website and running Black History Month events isn't enough. Having a zero tolerance policy for racial discrimination isn't enough if microaggressions happen all the time and go unchallenged. And perhaps the most recent relevant example, stating that an industry isn't racist without checking the experience and representation of people of colour within that industry, and without challenging publicly visible instances of racist behaviour, also isn't enough. So I think there are some organisations that come out well where it's been sustained, where they've thought about it. My concern with the massive rise in diversity and inclusion positions that I'm seeing advertised is that they are almost all short-term positions. If you look at them, they are 1 year fixed-term contracts. You can't solve this in a year, and it may be that organisations need to make the business case by piloting it for a year, and then it becomes permanent, and that may well be a pragmatic approach to starting behaviour. So I think I'd want to wait and see how many of those people were in post affecting change in 18 months, 2 years time, and then we'll know.
Fair enough. And I think it's a very good point. It's not about long term. If you're really, really serious about it and you're not using it as I've also done this socially responsible thing that everyone is doing and jump on that bandwagon, is how long are you planning to continue down this route? And what exactly are you doing? Are you doing the bare minimum? Or are you actually really thinking through how am I making change in my organization and for my people long term? So.
And to that point, I'm just wondering if you think that there's an ideal way of doing that for those clients of yours that you cover. Like, for instance, I've seen quite a few small entrepreneurs in the US. What they've done after George Floyd, of course, aside from the Black Square and sharing the mic, etc., is kind of create a plan that they would share to their audience, but that's a minority of them who've done that. And then after the 6 months mark, they've shared what they've done from that plan, and they're planning to do that at the 1 year anniversary. I find that to be a great way of showing progress and accountability. And I'm wondering if you think that's there's a better way of doing that to make sure that we're accountable.
Oh, I think that's great. I mean, I think if you have organisations who are committed to continually learning and unlearning, probably unlearning what they think they know first and then learning after that, the key is communicating what they have done and what the next steps, and then following through on that. The worst thing is we sometimes see big organisations of all sizes with long lists of we will do this, we will do that, and then you don't hear what happens.
Yeah.
And that's true whether you're an employee or whether you're external looking in. And I think not following through. So a couple of organisations that I've worked with at the moment, their overall ethos is basically show, don't tell. So I'm having to say to them, you do need to tell people what you're doing and what you've done, but I get that what they don't want to do is just talk about it. They want to actually do stuff, and that's very much part of it. I think the other thing that will help organisations be successful and effective in doing this is realising that there's a role for the organisation and there's a role for individuals. And the way you can think about that is that organisationally there's responsibility to build inclusive process and practice as well as policies. So we all know you can have as many policies written down as you like, but if the day-to-day practice differs from those policies and they're not enforced, then it doesn't help. Support and reward the positive steps, communicate values and behaviours, speak out when needed. Also support individuals in different ways, recognising the different barriers that they face and experience, and to support individuals in developing a more inclusive mindset. But ultimately, organisations are made up of individuals. And unless those individuals, particularly key influencers, and that might be the leaders, but it might be elsewhere in the organisation, they need to do the work understanding their own limiting assumptions, stereotypes and biases that they hold, understanding how they can take steps to make sure those that the ones they're aware of, and maybe some that they're not, don't affect the decisions that they take, and educating ourselves about the way in which structure and our organisations perpetuate inequality. So there is a role for both the organisation and the individual. And I think that organisations that support individuals to do that work on themselves will benefit massively from that overall.
Wow, thank you for that. I think that our audience will agree that, you know, this interview showing how, you know, working with you would be, you know, you've got so much integrity, and I mean, to do this work, you have to be doing it with someone that you can trust, and we can feel that in the conversation, trying to do the right thing, and having those conversations, and feeling that you still have things to learn and improve on, which is how we are tackling these conversations. And I think that's one of our main takeaways. I was wondering what is, if you had to find one takeaway, if you had to just pick one of these events, before we show a fantastic video that you actually showed us at a networking event a few months ago. I want to share that video to the audience. Is there one takeaway you'd like to give us?
So I think I would go back to where I started and say that there are a lot of similarities between climate change and diversity and inclusion. In both cases, individuals can make a difference, whether that's climate change, you know, reducing your carbon footprint, or whether that's diversity and inclusion, normalizing conversations about gender equality, about race equality, having those conversations. And the video that you're about to show shows that, especially if you have small people in your life, it's never too soon to start having a conversation with them about challenging things that they might come across, because fixed ideas and stereotypes get picked really early and often unintentionally, and we don't realize it happened. And so the most important thing you can probably do is to talk about it, challenge people's thoughts and feelings. It will feel uncomfortable, but that's okay. We grow by being uncomfortable.
Love that. We're going to share the video now. It's a 2-minute video. Hopefully we won't have any technical issues. Let me know if you can see it and when you can see it.
Yeah, it looks good from my side.
Perfect.
This afternoon, we're going to draw people doing different jobs. And the first job we're going to draw is a firefighter.
Have a think in your head what a firefighter looks like.
What's your firefighter called?
Mine's called Firefighter Gary. Firefighter Stash. Firefighter Simon. He's big and strong. He's got a big helmet on.
That's brilliant, isn't it? Next, we're going to draw a surgeon. Have you thought of a name for your surgeon?
Jim Bob.
Jim Bob.
He's a brain surgeon. I think he would wear a stethoscope. He gives you medicine.
That's his ambulance. Okay, next, we're going to draw a fighter pilot.
This is his jet plane. He rescues people. He likes to do stunts in the air and stuff.
Okay, now who would like to meet these people for real?
Yeah! When they're dressed up.
My name's Tamsin and I'm a surgeon in the NHS.
My name's Lauren and I'm a pilot in the Royal Air Force.
My name's Lucy, I'm a firefighter in the London Fire Brigade. So who wants to know how to do an operation?
Who's putting it on?
Try my stethoscope.
We'll put this in here. There you go. Now you're a proper fighter pilot.
So into your ears, can you hear that?
Yeah.
It's really good. Yeah, it's much better than my kids' one.
So powerful.
It is. I love that clip. It really, it's just to speak volumes. 61 drew men and only 5 drew women.
Gender stereotypes are set by the age of 5, 7, and we know other stereotypes also get set around that age too. So we start young.
Amazing. Just goes to show the importance of having these conversations with your children, as you mentioned, Ellie. You know, we've got little ones as well. And interestingly enough, between 5 and 7, so it's not too early for that conversation, because it was one of the other things we discussed with Tanya in the first series, is talking to children about race and racism and so on. So it's good to know that at 5 you should have that conversation with your children about, you know, whatever stereotypes.
Yeah, I think boys and girls. I mean, that's a very binary view of gender, but gender discussions, I think, probably are easier a little earlier than race ones. I know that. So you know, by the time you get to, I think, say by the time you get to about 8 or 9, most children know that it's wrong to make assumptions based on ethnicity, and by the time they get to 10 or 11, they are sophisticated enough to be able to challenge assumptions. But so I think that takes place a little later. But the gender ones, I think maybe they're exposed. Children are exposed to that more often. So that conversation earlier.
I think when we discuss this with Tanya as well, when it comes to Black families, you'll find that we speak about race at around that age, because, you know, there's many times my daughter has come home, she's like, oh, my hair doesn't look like my friends, or my skin doesn't look like my friends. And so they have learned at a much earlier stage, perhaps, than other white children, that I am different. Yeah.
White children never have to have that.
No, exactly. And why am I different? You know, and she'll get called names, and, you know, someone telling her, oh, your skin looks dirty and things like that. And she's like, Mommy, why would someone say that to me? It's not, and it's obviously, you know, around race, or say something mean about her hair looks weird or something like that. And it's not something that a lot of white children would experience. Not, you know, they'll get bullied, of course, any child can get bullied, but it's not based on their race. And therefore, as Black people, we have a lot of families that I know, including myself, will have those conversations at a very early age, unfortunately.
And we should probably, you know, as white families, we should probably also be having those conversations at an early age too.
Exactly.
And then we might start to make some.
Exactly. And then it just means that the other children as well are not saying such things to the other Black kids, because you already had this conversation that people are different, and people come in different colors and forms and hair and so on, and it doesn't turn into a negative thing. So, yeah,
Valuing difference.
exactly. Well, I think that brings us to the end of our series today, and we just want to thank you so much, Ellie, for everything you've shared with us, for taking your time with us today. Would you like to share how people can get in touch with you?
Yes, so I have a website, which is www.equisense.co.uk, and you can find out more about me there, or you can find me on LinkedIn as Ellie Highwood. That's probably the best place to go.
All right, brilliant. And we'll put your details as well when we post it online, and we'll put the details on there as well, together with the video. So thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
And don't forget to follow Ellie and watch the rest of our videos as well, and follow us on Facebook, and check out our website as well. Have a lovely day. Bye.